David, roll call. Okay, thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Joint Committee of the City Region Deal for Stirling and Clackmannanshire. David, would you do a roll call, please?
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Chair. Just confirm the Joint Committee members present. Councillor Martha Bennett? No. Councillor Neil Bennett?
I'm here.
Graham Duff?
Present.
Councillor Earl? No. Councillor Farmer?
Present.
Councillor Forson?
Yep, I'm here.
Councillor Kane? No. Eileen Schofield?
Present.
Professor Sparks?
Good afternoon, all.
Thank you. Just to check again, Councillor Martha Bennett? No. Councillor Earl? Or Councillor Kane?
No. Okay.
No. Sorry, Chair, just to confirm, the quorum does require 2 members to be present from Clackmannanshire Council. I'm not sure if Councillor Balsilly's here as a substitute for someone. I think he is on the call.
So is there any substitutes? Apologies. Donald?
I'm on the call. I don't know whether I can substitute, Ellen, given the political nature of the substitute. I'd be happy to substitute if it keeps us quoted, but
Yeah, if it's appropriate for Donald to substitute, then happy to have him so the meeting can go ahead. Could someone advise on that?
Councillor Balsilly is listed as a substitute from Clackmannanshire for the Joint Committee. I'm not aware of him being allocated any specific member substitute for, but we do require 2 Clackmannanshire members to continue with the meeting.
okay, I'm happy to substitute then.
Yeah, and Martha or Councillor Earl might come in at a later point, so we can continue on that basis. Is there any declarations of interest? No, there's no urgent business. We've got item 4, which is the previous minute of the Joint Committee on the 1st of February, pages 1 to 8. Can I take that as a correct record? Yep. Okay, thank you. Now move on to item 5.1, which is a Joint Committee rolling action log 9 to 10. Are there any points from that? Nope. 5.2 Joint Committee forward plan 11 to 14. Are there any comments on that? Any points of clarification? Nope. Okay. We're now into item 6, which is items for consideration. And 6.1 is the skills and inclusion programme with the where we have to approve 2 business justification cases, and that's pages 15 to 188. Who's going to introduce this paper?
I'll introduce that, Chair. That's Emma. Thank
Okay, Emma, thank you.
Good afternoon, members. So the purpose of this report is to seek Joint Committee approval for 2 business justification cases, so the Flexible Skills Project and the Inclusion Workers and Investment Fund Project. Both of these business cases were endorsed by Scottish Government last month, and they now require Joint Committee approval so that we can progress with project delivery and also draw down funding. So the report gives detail on project activity as well that's been happening over the last 6 months or so across both of those projects. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I've also got Ed Gibbon here of Stirling Council to help with any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I'll open it up for any questions, points of clarification. Neil?
Thanks, Scott. Yeah. In terms of this one, I noticed there was some stuff in there about the National Transition Fund and the over 25 training. One of the things that I do wonder about this, and I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't looked at it in a huge amount of detail, this paper. I have skimmed through it and read the introductions and the summaries, but I just wanted to kind of get assurance around about the business case justification in the context of all life training, because we have this significant issue with regards to people needing to change careers, and especially when you look at the kind of transition to net zero, which I know was mentioned in there. But I didn't see a huge amount in there about taking people on that training journey when they're already in, when they're beyond 25, basically. I just wonder, can you talk me through what's in the business justification case about that, please?
I can't point to any specific part at the moment. I would just kind of a general statement about that it's aimed at all age ranges and all different types of people. And I know that there's lots of different skills and employability projects that are already underway that deal with lots of different people at different stages in their career and different aspects of that. So yeah, it will be aimed at complementing that, what's already going on, but it's not aimed at just one particular age group or profile. It is aimed at different target groups, as you'll have seen in the business justification cases. So it's about that inclusiveness. So it is aimed at specific target groups. But other than that, there's no kind of age or anything like that limit. It's aimed at a wide range of people as we go through the process.
I wonder if this is something for this stage or the next stage, but I would quite like to see as one of the measurable outcomes of this what the age of the various people, the various individuals who are engaging with this process. And actually, I mean, I'm not really sure exactly how you would design a target around that, but certainly in terms of a measurable outcome, I would like to understand that as we go through the process. So at this stage, I would like to ensure that we are measuring that, and we're talking about measuring that in our justification, because I mean, the participants, I think it's on page 7 of the thing there, in terms of the different people there, you're absolutely right. It doesn't actually say anything about it being specific to age groups, but certainly I don't know. I mean, you'll be able to give me guidance in terms of how the age brackets sort of work in employability, in terms of, I'm sure there's under 25s, over 25s, 25 to 45 and beyond that, and all the rest of it. I think making sure that there's a measure in there for that at this stage would be quite useful.
Well, what we do measure, what we do record through our handling system is the kind of recording of the journey of people, their full details, including their age bracket and their journey through the process, and that will all be recorded and evaluated at the end of the project. So that information will be there, for sure.
Right, that's fine, as long as it is a key indicator in there. The other thing I really wanted to kind of talk about was making sure that there's something in it. We're talking at this stage about the diversity of provider. I mean, obviously there's going to be significant amounts of training being offered and undertaken here. And really, what I wanted to make sure, one of the things that I've often felt around about the way that we do, especially the skills training and the long-term and short-term unemployed in Stirling and actually throughout Forth Valley, is that we tend to use our own services and we don't bring in significant amounts of other providers. In terms of that diversity of provider that's working alongside us to provide this, what do we have in here to make sure that we aren't over reliant on one provider or another provider?
Again, I can't point to any specific bits of text in the business case at the moment, but I do know we've got a very complex skills and employability landscape within Stirling and Clacks, and what we'll have is a flexible skills coordinator there to make sure they understand and map out all the different providers and make sure they understand the landscape, and so that they're going to the most appropriate provider at the time, and not just ones that we always use. So that will definitely be a key role of that flexible skills coordinator to have a real true understanding of the landscape.
Thanks for that, Emma. That's another thing that I would like to see reported back quite regularly throughout this project, either here or to whichever body it is that it's going to be accountable to, is talking about the number of providers who are involved in this, because this is a huge opportunity for us to put a major vote of confidence into our local provider community. And what I would want to make sure is that we're spreading that round so that all of them can use it as an investment opportunity to build capacity. So I see that I can see an indicator in here in terms of the number of providers, third sector, private and state sector providers that are actually involved in this, and that being reported quite regularly, and the ability to challenge that somewhere. I think I would like to make sure that that's being done there as well.
No problem.
That's all I had.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. Is there any other questions, points of clarification? Are we content in terms of point 1, the approval of the business justification cases, in terms of the flexible skills project and the inclusion of workers and investment fund project, and to note the commencement of activity as part of both projects? We content? Thank
Chair,
you.
can I just check that sorry, Chair, can I just check that the 2 points that I raised there are recorded somewhere so that we make sure that they get picked up?
Absolutely, yeah. Emma?
Yeah, they're noted, thank you.
They're noted, right, thank you. Okay, now we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is...
Excuse me, Chair. I noticed Councillor Earls arrived from Clackmannanshire Council, so I'll just step back and allow him to take his place to ensure political balance in your group. Thank you.
Okay, right, thank you for that, Councillor Balsillie, and thanks for coming in to ensure that we could continue on with the meeting. So good to see you here, Councillor Earl. Okay, we now move on to 6.3, which is the 6.2, sorry, which is the implementation plan, pages 189 to 280. Is there anybody here to introduce us?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jacob Chandler, Head of RPMO. I'll introduce the paper and then I'll ask my colleague Jerry Connolly to outline the financial position in a bit more detail.
Okay.
So firstly, I think it's important to know that this is a positive story, the implementation plan for this year, but there's quite a lot of activity happening within this financial year. Now, as part of the terms of our grant offer letter, we are required to submit an annual implementation plan and a financial profile associated with it. So this is really our best available information on projects at a point in time. The RPMO have worked closely with partners and conducted a review of all projects and programmes and their associated milestones and financial profiles up to January 2022. And so joint committee members will recall briefing sessions on this previously. So it's also important to note that this is an indicative position. It's our best case scenario for the year, and it's really taking into account all the lessons learned as well as our collective understanding of risks across the programme. And once this is approved, if this is approved, it then provides a baseline for monitoring and reporting for the year. However, further work will continue in the background and there will be changes as we get a better understanding of projects and programmes as they evolve. But what we will do is make sure that those changes follow the appropriate governance process and the change control process, which is also being tabled to this committee. I'll now hand over to my colleague Jerry, who will talk through the financial aspects of this in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and good afternoon, folks. I'm Jerry Connolly, Finance Manager, RPMO, and I'm just going to talk you through the slides, and you'll find them page 255 on to around 280 onwards. The first slide on page 255 is a summary, and just for the help of the meeting, if you don't mind, I could share a slide with you that captures some of the key points.
That'd be helpful, yeah.
It's quite a lot to get through, so let's try and distill it for you just a little bit. And can everybody see this slide?
Yes.
Yep. Yep. What we have here, I thought it would be quite useful to just show the kind of track the progress of the deal to date, and also we've got year 3, what we're projecting, as Anne alluded to. We need to secure the funding for the deal for year 3. So year 3 is what we're expecting from the 1st of April onwards. So what you have here is a list of all the projects, some programmes underneath the city region deal. So the first column will tell you the name of the project, project type, that'll tell you whether it's capital or revenue. And what we have from then is just the summary of spend. So looking at year 1, we are all aware of the situation there, and from year 1, obviously we had no drawdown on funding and there was no projects in delivery. With year 2, hold on a second. with year 2, some good news. We're at a point where we are spending money and starting to draw down funds, and we've got 4 projects currently in delivery. These are named as SIEC Phase 1, Walk Cycle Live Stirling, Flexible Skills, and Inclusion and Investment Funds that Emma has told you about earlier. And that's 4 projects to a value of 2.4 million. And the basis of the grant offer letter is effectively in year 3. So in year 3, we've got planned 10 projects in delivery to a value of 16.7 million. Just, I suppose, one part to go over on this is risk. So one thing to say is if a project is in delivery, so all the year projects, I would say looking at these, that's a kind of low risk element. So once you start spending money on them, they'll continue. And then with the other projects, there's a number of business cases, project business cases, program business cases ready for reviews. Some will come in July, and that should secure some of the other funding for the other projects so that they can kickstart in 22-23. Another item to draw out would be the mismatch between funding and also expenditure. So we've kind of talked about this at length. We mentioned it in the briefing sessions for January. We have a profile over the 10 years of the deal that tells us what funding we'll get from government. As you know, we work to a different profile, which is the expenditure profile. So we're just cracking on with these projects, and it's that profile we've got for expenditure. There's a mismatch with what's available at the time. This is not unique to City Region deal Stirling and Clackmannanshire. This is the same for all region deals. So I think 9 region deals across the landscape, they all have the same thing. So there's a funding profile over the years, and there's also the expenditure profile. So that's a risk that we will always monitor. And I suppose the thing to say is for Joint Committee, if there comes a point where the risk is high, where there could be a pressure where we won't cover the cost, we'll relay that information to you. But the good news for 22-23 is there's no risk in terms of funding. We've got the full funding available to spend the 16.7 million that will be in the grant offer letter. So I think that's me for the finance slides. I hope I've answered some of the questions and kind of summarised some of the main points there, but I'm happy to take some questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a question in terms of the projections for 22-23, with the 5 million that's associated with the MOD. My understanding of the MOD site was that we were still in the process of ascertaining to our assurance that the contamination or decontamination of the land was at an appropriate level, and that B, that there had to be a business justification case to be forwarded to UK government, and it just seems that 5 million seems to be an awful lot, given where I presumed we were in terms of the MOD site. Brian, I see your hands up.
Thanks, Councillor Farmer, for the question. Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment. So you're absolutely right, that's the 2 critical issues. So we're working through just now the strategic outline business case, which Treasury have said they require to approve to trigger effectively the release of the land and crucially the release of the funding into to the deal for us then to purchase the land from the MOD. We are targeting the approval of that case by Treasury over, or the development of that with Treasury over the summer period, with it coming to the September Joint Committee for approval. In terms of the financial side of it, it's assumed that the transaction for the land will take place towards the end of the next financial year in March 2023, more than likely, Councillor Farmer, which is obviously still within the financial year that Jerry has just outlined for 2022-2023, which is why the 5 million is there. On the aspect of the contaminated land, we're working with the MOD and their technical experts on the contamination, decontamination, and also our environmental health teams and SEPA on exactly that level of contaminants, and they are working on a programme that would see it decontaminated by the time the land would transfer to us effectively at the end of March 2023.
Thank you for that. Neil.
Yeah, on that, I've got a couple of points, Scott, but on that particular one, Brian, are we any closer to articulating what it is we're going to do with the land? Because it seems to have gone very quiet, and I don't think there's been any consultation with any of the communities around there or anything like that. I'm perhaps things have moved on. There's been huge amounts of work done in the background, but I certainly haven't seen anything, and I'd be very wary of entirely worked out proposals coming forward which haven't taken people with us.
Thanks to Councillor Benny for the question. Absolutely, and that's part of the discussions we've been having with the Treasury over the level of business case that we can provide as a deal for effectively what is a land and a financial transaction. So it's unlike the rest of the projects where we're physically building or physically providing a product as part of the funding provided by government. This is around the land transaction, and then quite clearly the redevelopment of the site would follow the transaction itself. In terms of the business justification case, it will be based on the outline master plan that was in the heads of terms for the deal, and also the assumptions that's in the current local development plan for Stirling, i.e. mixed use, residential and business space. The fine detail of that will be worked through the following phases, ideally through 2023 and 2024, and public consultation will be part of that. The business justification case that comes back to committee will articulate what the opportunities are for the site and what the interests are for the site. It's too early for us to share that just now with the committee, but rest assured that will come forward during the next course of this committee during 2022 before the business justifications case is signed off.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I think it's difficult to, well, if we don't have a clear vision for what we're going to do with it, it's difficult to justify getting it, quite frankly. And I know
I think also, Neil, given what we've just been through in terms of the pandemic, we might have to have a focus on exactly what that master plan looks like, and is it still fit for purpose, given the perhaps changed patterns in terms of use as we go forward. So it will be an opportunity, I think, to have a look at that.
Chair, if I could just come back in on that point that both yourself and Councillor Benny are raising, is exactly those items and issues that we've been discussing with the Treasury as to why they're not looking for a full work-through business case, because obviously, as you appreciate in the context of the city deal, a full business case is detailed design, plan applications, contracts ready to be awarded, and it's in recognition of the fact that the use of that site might need to tweak to what Stirling needs just now and what the opportunities are, that they've set if you like, the threshold strategic outline business case. So we've already got work underway on that strategic outline business case anyway, and it would still allow in the next stages then the review and the further analysis of what the master plan really needs to play for Stirling, as Councillor Benny has highlighted there. But very rest assured there'll be full engagement with the committee during 2022 on the development of that.
Brian, there's two separate things there in my mind. There is the business case, which we need to provide to the Treasury and all of the, the huge amounts of text that they seem to require for everything. But the more importantly than that is us having an articulated vision about what it is we want the site to achieve. And that comes before the business case, that comes before the business justification, about having an idea and a vision about what it is that we're trying to achieve. The only vision that we seem to have for that site is that it's green in the LDP, which means mixed use. And I think until we can actually articulate that, I think it's incumbent upon us, and it's incumbent upon Stirling Council as the lead partner for that particular piece of work, to make sure that we have a positive vision for what that's actually going to achieve, which then informs the business cases and all the rest of it. I think that's the important aspect of what I'm trying to kind of get across there, Brian.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that, Councillor, and that work's been done in parallel. If it'd be useful for yourself and Councillor Farmer, happy to set up a session out with the joint committee just to go through that development in a little bit more detail to bring you up to speed with where we are just now.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful.
That'd be helpful.
couple of other things. The first one is sorry, and I know I feel like I say this at every single meeting, and I don't know what it is that I need to do to get change on this. The National Tartan Centre is still in here as a tourism and culture thing, when it should be an innovation and jobs creation vehicle. Does that require a motion? I mean, what do we have to do to have that change? Anne? Brian? Anne first.
I'm happy to go in.
I'm happy for Brian to go first.
Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Councillor Benny, for your question. Yeah, this is an item that was discussed again just at our Chief Operating Officer meeting last week. Carl Beattie raised exactly the same issue, Neil, and it's a legacy from the way that the deal was structured and the way that it's described as part of that documentation, as part of the annual conversation that's coming up this week with our government colleagues. That issue is going to be raised, because you're right, absolutely, it needs to be identified. Whilst tourism is linked to it, the focus is on the innovation aspect of it, and that's what the focus of the business case coming forward will be as well.
But the thing is, Brian, I mean, you know, you're right. I mean, this is one of these things that comes up. Everybody agrees it should be about innovation. You know, yeah, tourism's a bit of it, but the innovation and job creation bit, and you know, all the fantastic and amazing things that we could do with this thing come out of that. They're not about a nice museum about tartan. And yet I look at page 45 of the report, and there it is again. It's not just that it's in that heading, but all of the indicators, all of the stuff that's in there is indicating that this is about culture and tourism and getting people to have more overnight stays in Stirling, all of which are important. But if we spend that amount of spending that amount of money on a thing like that, I'm sure there are other cheaper ways of achieving the same thing. You know, unless this is about innovation, there's no point in doing it. And like I say, I just get frustrated because every time this comes up, it's agreed and everybody says yes and everybody seems to make the right noises, but it still seems to be in here and the indicators still seem to be there on page 45 of the report, which is what page is that? That's page 241.
I think the question is do we need to discuss with the funding partner vis-a-vis the UK government in terms of how it's nuanced, in terms of being more towards innovation as opposed to how it was originally badged, which was tourism and culture. And if that conversation is required, then that's something we should be undertaking, because in a way, what we want is, when we're going out to the public, is that in terms of the projects should be demonstrated as what it says on the tin. And if it doesn't say on the tin exactly what it is that we're seeking to do, which is primarily innovation and employment opportunities, and you know, looking at the potential for tartan and the international fashion industry, etc., then obviously the tin needs to be rebranded, right? So that's the issue there. So Anne, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. And I was just supporting Brian's response, and in response to a specific question by Councillor Benny, this kind of segues into the next subject, which is around change control. And one of the processes that government has in place, where there are sort of high-level changes, if you like, in terms of what a project is meant to be and how it's kind of getting changed over the course of the deal, it needs to go through that change control process for government to then be happy, because there were terms and conditions associated with why the project was in the deal and the way it was described. So I think there is a mechanism that we can use, and the annual conversation is a useful starting point to have that discussion. But that's the sort of formal governance process that we'll need to go through to change it to what is most appropriate at this point in time. Thank you.
Chair, I mean, I think I probably appreciate it, and I know that I was supposed to meet with Anne the other week to get a bit of an introduction, and perhaps we can talk about this when we reschedule that meeting. But I mean, my frustration here is born from the fact that I stood in a field in Stirling on the phone to Liz Truss, who was the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, explaining the vision for the National Tartan Centre at some point. I can't remember exactly when it was a number of years ago, and I talked about it being an innovation centre and about building it up, because they weren't keen on it being a cultural hub. And yet it seems that somewhere along the line between that and that initial conversation about it being an innovation hub, and now it seems to be stuck in the tourism thing. And I just don't understand why it's stuck there, because nobody, when I've spoken to people at UK government level, nobody has said that this should be a cultural and historical and tourism thing. It's all about the innovation. And I think that there's something that's happened. Someone somewhere along the line has changed this and put it in here, and it just doesn't seem to want to come out of there, because I don't hear anybody saying that it should be in there. I only had one other point to make, Chair, and it was more of an issue about governance and accountability. And I think that there's a real concern of mine here when I was going through this. And I know that we've got a lot of new people from the RPMO here, and I just wanted to kind of make sure that they're aware of this. There's 25 pages of spreadsheets in these papers. I do think that actually makes it very difficult to figure out what's going on, because I found myself leaping in between the two of them. And I know that it is essential that we see what's happening with this, but I would ask, just when you're kind of presenting these papers, just to have a think about how that can be presented in a way which is a little bit more accessible for us as members.
That's a fair point. Sure, yeah, I certainly, Anne and I had a discussion about that, Dave, when we had our one-to-one, and I know she's going to be meeting up with you, so she's very much aware of that.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, Ellen.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to come in on a point there that Anne raised in relation to Neil's question about the annual conversation, how issues like that could be raised through there. I said this last year, and I'm saying it again, as a committee member, I don't feel like I've had any way to shape the annual conversation. I understand that it's taken place on Thursday, but I don't think this committee has had an opportunity to discuss what we would like to see discussed in the annual conversation. I totally appreciate that the meeting is, kind of at the behest of the governments, etc. But we should have the opportunity to at least get things on the agenda that we want to discuss, exactly like what Neil's, kind of raised there. But there's also other issues as well. It can't keep on going like this. This is the second annual conversation. Scott and I took part in it last year, but really that seemed to be a bit of a mistake rather than by design. And the annual conversation is Thursday, and I've certainly not had any input into what's been discussed there. And I really don't think that's acceptable as a committee member. Yeah,
fair point. So if that can be taken on board, because we really need to have the early insight in terms of what concerns that the joint committee have and what issues we would like to be raised on our behalf in terms of the annual conversation, I think is important. So if the RPMO can take that on board as we go forward. Is there any other points at this stage? We've considered the implementation plan at 2.1, 2.2 to approve the proposed milestones and associated financial profile outline for each project of the CRD, which is, I have to say, never set in stone. It's always an iterative process, but if we can approve it at this point in time, then that would be helpful. Agreed? Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to 6.3, which is the change and control process. Anne, is this you?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce the plan, and then my colleague Nicole McIntosh will talk about the document in a bit more detail. I just wanted to outline the sort of purpose of this document itself, and the conversation we just had sort of illustrated that in some ways. So Scottish Government and UK Government require us to have a change control process in place for the deal, and all deals are expected to have this. And this was highlighted to us by Government whilst we were dealing with something separate. And so we're really responding to that request, which is why it has come at this point in time. Now, the main purpose of the change control process is to ensure that any changes or modifications, whether it's at a project level, programme level, or at a deal level, as we just discussed, are reviewed appropriately, their impacts understood, mitigated for if required. If there is fundamental discussions needed, that's all happening and the governance process is followed. So it's just a sort of basic governance document, really. And it is a live document, and this will evolve over the course of the deal. And it will link in with the implementation plan and the financial profiles that we just discussed. So this is just a sort of first version of this for this committee to look at in a bit more detail. I will hand over to my colleague Nicole McIntosh, who's drafted the document, and she can talk through some of the details some more. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. Nicole McIntosh, Project Analyst for the RPMO. You'll see the change control process within the pack. We have incorporated the current governance framework within this for the Stirling and Clackmannanshire City Region deal. We've also taken on government guidance, and through our PMO networks, we have seen best practice within the other city and growth deals. As Anne touched on earlier, this is an initial version, and we will keep this under review. We want to put the flowcharts into practice to almost stress test them and see if they are fit for purpose within our own deal. If this process is approved, we could implement it, and it would allow for a thorough monitoring, tracking and reporting system throughout the deal, recording changes to changes within the projects, changes at programme level as well. This then forms part of the reporting structure, and it allows us to inform all of the levels within the Stirling and Clackmannanshire City Region deal governance structure, from project managers right up to the members of joint committee, and it allows everybody to be involved in any future changes and future development as well. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Councillor Ellen Forson and then Neil Benny.
Thanks, Scott. I guess it's not so much a question, more a comment, but again, the joint committee is kind of the last to know. And this thing again, the top of the tree, I raise this kind of every time. It's the same when we come to kind of deal approval, it goes through everybody else and then comes to us. So essentially we're just seen to be rubber stamping it. Whereas I would like to be involved at a much earlier stage, particularly if there's going to be things changing within projects, rather than it going everywhere, being approved by governments and then back to us to just merely rubber stamp. Otherwise, I just don't see the point in being here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fair point, because I want to go into that in terms of the process, because I think the process is confusing, let's say. Neil.
Okay, no, I was just about to say exactly the same thing as Ellen, but she put it much better than I would. I think there's a process here in terms of who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. And realistically, I think there is a point here where some of the changes to the projects and stuff like that, you know what, I'm not going to, we as the joint committee aren't really going to be that bothered. We're not going to really care. They're small technical things, and that's fine. I want to know what's going on. That's the key important thing here, but without it being an inundation. So there's a judgment call to be made here, especially around about when I looked on page 288. Again, I see that judgment call of the Chief Officers Group, and we've spoken about this before. The Chief Officers Group decides themselves what they escalate here and what they don't escalate here. And I think that there's a point here where I want to know what they're deciding not to escalate here, whether it's a positive decision to make a change or a negative decision not to make a change. I want to know so it can be challenged and held to account. Because that's not happening in this process, and it's not happening elsewhere. And Ellen's absolutely right. I want to see things at a much earlier point so that I can understand and keep track in my own head from a governance and accountability point of view, but also from an influence over what we're doing point of view, that the changes that were being made and we're wanting to see are happening.
Right. Can I come in before yourself, Anne, because I've got some concerns as well. And if you look at Appendix A, and if there was a significant change, then it says that RPMO links with governments on appropriate measures. Now, to me, that wouldn't be the first step you would take, because if you look at the third step, it's SCCRD governance reviews, confirms or rejects the proposal that's come forward. Surely from a governance perspective, we need to get our own house in order and agree something before we then go to government to get their view on whether that is acceptable or whether it's not, and or whatever compromise we can come to. So again, in the second box, it says RPMO reviews and reports to appropriate levels of SC and CRD governance as required. Now, I would say if there's any change apart from minor technical changes, that they should, by their very nature, it should be more explicit, because at the end of the day, the buck stops at the joint committee. And the joint committee, it should explicitly say COGS and the joint committee, so that we can then review and report to the within the process. We then either agree or reject that change proposal. Then you, the RPMO, would liaise with government on the appropriate measures to go forward. Would be how I would see it, and so that we're actually there at the earliest possible stage. We can actually see if there's an alternate project being proposed, that we are obviously fully involved in that as committee members. This Appendix A does not seem to follow in that way. It seems very much we are consulted at the last minute, as Ellen said, to rubber stamp, as opposed to being actually in there and actually being part of the process, which either confirms or rejects the change, and then you go to government. You don't go to government first, you go to government after we've got our own house in order, is what I'd be saying. So, Anne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Forson and Councillor Benny, for those comments. I think that's really helpful. This is really just our first version of this document. And as Nicole mentioned, we've sought feedback from other deals in terms of how the change control process was structured, and we've pulled together what is an initial document. So your feedback is absolutely valid, and we will take that on board. The only point I wanted to make, I think, which was Councillor Benny's point around, what comes to joint committee and what you need visibility of. It was about that proportionality bit. So there will be things that are minor at a project level that you don't want to be escalated to, but you need visibility of. And so what we need to make sure is through our reporting process, there is enough visibility of those sort of smaller changes which are at a project level, but are not material to the deal itself. But anything that's material is definitely, ratified by reviewed by joint committee before it goes anywhere else. We do need to stress test the process. We need to test the process. We haven't tested this process before. So there is an element of we need to start using it, and we will make sure that joint committee are involved at every stage of that process. So just a sort of assurance, really. But thank you.
Okay, Neil.
Yeah, Chair, I can't imagine a situation where someone would get as far as going to the Chief Officer's group where I wouldn't want to see what that change was. Because, the minor changes, I've been a project manager. I've been a program manager as well. I know that, there are some times where you have to go through the change process because, there's some small minor change to the wattage and some, energy thing. And that's fine, because that maybe changes that. It has a knock-on effect, which is significant enough to change your project plan, right? That's fine. That would never get to the Chief Officer group. It would never get to program level. So those kind of changes are absolutely fine. It's anything that comes to the Chief Officers group, I want sight of that. And I think that's the proportionality thing. Now, it's not necessarily that I want that agreed at this committee, because sometimes that's not appropriate. It's about us being able to see it, because we're the ones who are responsible. As you said, Scott, the buck stops here. I'm concerned. What we've got to be careful about here on page 282, we're being asked to approve this process. Now, the way I'd been thinking about how would I amend this so that it was acceptable at this stage was that I would say, right, okay, well, let's make sure that anything that goes to Chief Officer Group is informed, that the joint committee members are informed about it. But it does sound what you're saying there, Anne, and tell me if I'm wrong here in picking this up, that you kind of want to have another swing at this based on our feedback. Is that where you're at the moment?
It is, but if there was a mechanism, Councillor Benny, by which you would be comfortable approving this subject to certain specific changes, and if those changes are that if there was everything that goes to chief officers also goes to joint committee, that is okay too. We're open to feedback.
I think that would satisfy what my view is, but I know Ellen had a different point about the involvement level. Would that satisfy what you're looking at, Ellen?
Not really, because we're approving something, and all it is a kind of a slight changing of words there. I think I need the whole thing to be really looked at, and come back with I suppose just respecting the role of the committee.
I think we need to look at the process. We can't agree a process when it's clearly, in my view, it's clearly flawed in the sense that if there is a change, and yes, it's significant, would you be going to appropriate governments for measures as a first stage, as opposed to actually going through COGS and the joint committee to actually seek approval of the change in the first place. You know, because that seems to me to be a bit counterintuitive there. So we need to actually get the process in a way that we're comfortable with, and where the joint committee and COGS are at the centre of that decision-making process, as opposed to what Appendix says A at the moment, which says, you know, the change document submitted, RPMO liaises with government and appropriate measures. Well, no, I don't see that as being the appropriate way forward. Brian, you've got your hand up. You're muted, Brian.
I'm mute, apologies. Thanks, Chair. Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment, Stirling Council. I think, as Anne said, we've not used this formal change control process yet, and as we all know, the governance arrangements within the City Region deal and the points of contact and liaison with government are different from how we would manage change controls within our own organisations, and obviously we're managing this partner partnership. There's certainly no intention through the process or the role of COGS to overstep the governance arrangements or to take any decisions on behalf of joint committee, as has been made clear by the COGS previously. There is a clear understanding that the decision making and the only decision making rests with the joint committee, and COGS and the rest of the structure is effectively there to discharge the decisions of committee, whether that be approval of business cases, approval of alternative projects that would come forward, or approval of financial profiles, etc. I think there is of clearly given the feedback from the three, a need for us to review that and probably look at a couple of worked examples as to how the change control would work in a couple of scenarios, because as Councillor Benny said, it's about proportionality, and it may be that there is a need for us as the senior responsible officers, the chief operating officers in terms of the chief execs, to have some discussions with government before the issue comes to committee, depending on what the change is. So, for example, if it's a change of financial profile, or if it's looking at how we could switch funding between years, some of that discussion may have had to play through to look at what the options would be, so that committee can be best informed. And I think we just need to have the process that allows both of those scenarios to play through. But please be rest assured, there's no attempt in this process to try and shortcut any of the due diligence by committee or indeed your decision-making processes. That's effectively the decision point within the process, less for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, while I accept that, you know, the wording could be far more robust in the sense of saying that something goes to the appropriate level of governance is not really acceptable, because that's opening up too wide an interpretation there, when it's quite clear where it should go in terms of ultimately the joint committee and COGS to review before going to joint committee. So to me, that is fundamental, in the sense that if we're approving a governance process, then it has to have the checks and balances in there to ensure that there is no misinterpretation of the process that has to be undertaken. And at present, the wording is not tight enough in order for me to have that assurance. So your hands up, right?
Yeah, just to come back in. Thanks for that, Councillor Farmer. So as Anne says, we'll take away. There's other SROs and indeed one of the COGS on the call as well. So they'll all have heard the comments coming from the three members. We'll take that away and we'll review it and we'll bring it back to the following committee.
Excellent. So in terms of the report, we note the content of the report. We've considered the content of the change in control process. We are not approving this at this stage. It will come back to the next meeting once the views and comments of members have been taken into account. Neil.
Yeah, Chair, just to check. I mean, we're not leaving a massive gaping hole by not approving this, are we? I mean, what's the ramification of not approving it today? Because I mean, it's going to be probably September before you get another meeting of this group together. By the time we've set everything up and all the rest of it, could be a wee while. Just checking it's not going to cause huge problems if we don't approve today. Perhaps Anne could.
Anne,
because it, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to get this document right. for the process to work properly. So I think let's get the document right. We'll work towards getting that right. And if there are processes that need to be, if there are changes that we need to work through, we will just work through the governance channels that exist to make that, work. So
that's cool.
Okay, excellent. Right, I'll be happy to agree the amended recommendations. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Regional Economic Advisory Board, SCREAB and REF update. Anne, is that you?
Thank you, yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to very briefly say that this paper is really about the progress of setting up SCREAB and REF since the last joint committee. My colleague Paul Morris is going to talk through the detail, but before we get into the detail of that, I thought it was important to highlight that individuals and names may be discussed as part of this section. So the guidance from governance colleagues is that you may wish to deal with this paper in private if you think that's appropriate.
My instinct is that we discuss the paper in its generality, and when it comes to the recommendation of appointing chair to REF, then we go into private session with regard to that. People, because I think if we just go into private session now, then that would not be as transparent as we could be. So, so Paul, if you want to give us an overview, please.
Thanks, Councillor Farmer. Good afternoon, everyone. Paul Morris, Project Manager with the RPMO. This really is, as Anne suggested, simply an update on where we are with both SCREAB and REF. You'll be delighted to hear that they both met on the 7th of March. Both had successful meetings. SCREAB had a short agenda with 3 substantive items. That was, first of all, which we'll come on to in a moment, a paper around how we populate the 6 private sector places on SCREAB. The second paper was to consider the later stages of the guide to skills pathway plans within each of the projects, which is probably something that, had SCREAB been in place earlier, would have been a key component of its work plan. And the third item was its work plan. So starting to consider the things that SCREAB would like to look at over the next 12 months. REF also had a short agenda. Its short agenda was primarily composed of a work plan paper and a paper on the recent Revitalising the Forth Valley Economy event. And it elicited a discussion around the future of REF and possible connections with other deals around the Stirling Clacks area. So thinking about SCREAB and its private sector places, it was agreed that we would look at all options to find individuals who would take up each of the 6 places. And I think it's been discussed at previous meetings. The way that the 6 places are to be constituted is to have 3 from Stirling and 3 from Clacks, and within them 1 small and medium-sized enterprise in each of those 3, and 2 other private sector enterprises. Now that could be more SMEs or it could be larger employers. I believe there was some discussion at the last meeting, which I had to submit my apologies for, that discussed the composition of the current list of applicants. What SCREAB agreed was to hold those ones over and to incorporate them into future work, which, as I've mentioned in the paper today, will involve both informal contacts through networks of contacts, both personal and professional contacts in the area, and a revised approach through the 3 business organisations, and possibly some further social media and traditional media work to try to maximise the number of applications that we receive. We're looking to do that work over April and May, which will then allow both SCREAB and REF to meet again, hopefully after an introductory meeting of the Joint Committee post-election, and once arrangements are in place to reconstitute the body after the election. Now back to SCREAB, we're looking to have those 6 successful applicants in place, and from them there'll be a decision taken to nominate 1 as chair of SCREAB, which will then obviously be brought to the next Joint Committee, and will then in turn allow us to move from a position of interim chairs to having a more formalised arrangement. Now, as I've mentioned, REF also had to go through the process of trying to select a chair. We invited personal nominations from members of REF, and we've received 1, which we may wish to consider after any questions that the committee may have.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. I'll open it up for any questions for this section, and then we can move into private session for the item in terms of the Ref Chair. Neil.
Thanks for that, Paul. It was really useful. Great, nice wee overview there, and I'm really glad to see that these committees are meeting. Paul, I just wonder if, as a matter of course, agendas and minutes from those meetings could be shared with the members of the Joint Committee, just so we know what we're saying, you know, what kind of guidance and what kind of information they're considering and stuff like that, because I think that would be quite useful for us in the context of when we get their advice on certain things, we kind of have a vague notion of what it is that they've been speaking about. I think if that would be, I suppose it's the sort of thing it would be, it should be acceptable. I wouldn't have seen any reason why we couldn't, but do you think there would be any problem with us having that?
No, I don't think so. I think there might be a problem with your ability to take all the information on board. There's a large volume of information coming through the Joint Committee as it is, but absolutely we can ensure that the distribution of those papers is made to you in good time.
I'm not thinking that it needs to come to the Joint Committee for discussion or anything like that, Paul. It's more the top sheet of the agenda to have a rough idea of what they're talking about rather than all the detail, because we can ask for the detail if we need it.
I think that would be absolutely fine.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay. So it's certainly good. It seems to be a long and tortuous journey to get where we are at this point in time, but at least we can see light at the end of the tunnel. Is there any other questions or points at this before we move into private session? Neil?
Yeah, just to check. I mean, we've just got rid of the idea of the Joint Commission then, yeah? The City Commission and the Clacks Commission were going to merge and we're going to have one commission. I take it with these things meeting now that we're just, because I think that probably will require a decision if we're going to do that.
Paul?
Apologies that, as you know, the RPMO was set up in the summer of last year. This, I think, sounds like something which was discussed and considered prior to our establishment. So happy to take that offline to try and understand more about what that might mean. But my understanding is that REF and SCREAB replaced those bodies.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to be corrected if that isn't the case.
They were supposed to sit alongside it, because one of the places that we were supposed to recruit some of our private sector people were from the City Commission, or rather the Joint Clackmannanshire and Stirling Commissions that was going to be set up. But it wasn't really so much a question for yourself, Paul, or for Anne, because you guys are quite new to this. It was more a question for, well, primarily Nikki and Carol if they were here, but I don't think they're here, are they? No, they are. That's fine. We can take it up offline.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right, if there's no further questions, we can invoke, if we're all agreed, Standing Order 37, because we'll be discussing individuals with regard to the next item on the agenda. So if we can have the recording halted, please.